Welcome to Eviliv3, the live media commentary show that answers the question, are hobbits real? Subscribe if you're new to the channel because today we are reviewing The Hobbit, the novel, not the film, Zzz. Or cartoon. Zzz. Anyway, my initial thoughts of The Hobbit are, wow, it really took me a long time to get to this book. It's been, let me fix this a little bit. This is for children, not young kids. This is for children, as noted by J.R.R. Tolkien himself. And so I really should have read this as the first fantasy novel or alongside the Chronicles of Prydain? I don't know, Prydain. I've already reviewed on this channel. And Last Unicorn and stuff like that. I'm a lifelong fantasy fan. And so anytime I get a chance to sort of travel back in time and live vicariously through younger Adam, it's not really vicariously, it's just nostalgia, really is what it is. And reading some of these older books, I'm interested in it. So anyway, my initial thoughts were, wow, this is really just for kids. This is not the films or, this is not an adult novel at all. I mean, I'm used to reading George R.R. Martin nowadays, you know what I mean? Where that's wildly adult and that is very much not. So I'm interested. I haven't read the Lord of the Rings trilogy yet, or the Silmarillion. So I am looking forward to reading those next, so I get a really nice sort of full view of what this universe is that George R.R. Martin, that J.R.R. Tolkien wrote, so that people are going to be freaking out. Ma'am, how dare you? Anyway, I'm interested. I'm making my own campaign setting right now called Dire Lands, and I like sort of reflecting back on some older and newer ideas to just inspire myself. And this is one of them. So this was written by J.R.R. Tolkien, published by George Allen and Unwin in 21 September 1937. That's right. Back in the 30s, when war was a very, very recent memory, and the atrocities of Hitler are, I don't know, alive and well. So anyway, it won the Carnegie Medal. Well, it was nominated for the Carnegie Medal Award, and it was awarded a prize from the New York Herald Tribune for Best Juvenile Fiction. Like I said, it's a children's book. And it was one of the best-selling books of all time. It's never been out of print. It's had many adaptations for stage, screen, radio, board games, and video games. It takes cues from narrative models of children's literature as shown by its omniscient narrator and characters that young children can relate to, such as the small, food-obsessed, and morally ambiguous Bilbo. The text emphasizes the relationships between time and narrative progress, and it openly distinguishes safe from dangerous in its geography, meaning some areas are safe, some areas are not safe. The setting of The Hobbit, as described in its original dust jacket, is, quote, ancient time between the age of fairy and the dominion of men in an unnamed fantasy world. The world is shown on the end paper map as Western lands, westward, and Wilderland as the east. Originally, this world was self-contained, but Tolkien began to work on The Lord of the Rings, and he decided that these stories should fit into the legendarium that he had been working on privately for decades. So The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings became the end of the Third Age of Middle-earth within Arda, which is the land or the planet or whatever. Eventually, those tales of the earlier periods became published as the Silmarillion and other posthumous works. So this was originally a standoff in its own little thing that later he decided to incorporate it into what he'd already been working on in other aspects. And it's really interesting when you think about it that way because, and I'm going to get to it in the end, I might as well just get to it now. My favorite part of The Hobbit is what's happening behind the scenes. When you watch the films of The Hobbit, they included a bunch of stuff from the Silmarillion and stuff that happened off camera, not in the book itself, but happened at the same time of the book. And so what I like most about this is that it lets you know that there are other major events happening in this world concurrently with what is happening in this short little story here. And so what it does is it inspires you with these ideas of Azog killing a father, or a necromancer existing in the south that the Hobbit should stay away from no matter what, because it's way too dangerous to even get near. And that Radagast, who is another wizard like Gandalf, which you're like, wait a second, there's more than one wizard? What does this mean? Like, at the point that this was released, it wasn't fully fleshed out. You didn't really know. And so I'm sort of going into this with that state of mind. Like, okay, this is Tolkien before everything was mapped out. This is him exploring and just telling a story. And that he builds on this story by dropping these little cues. Like when the dwarves and the hobbits went into Mirkwood, Gandalf was like, I got to pop smoke. There's some shit happening in the south. He doesn't say, I'm going to go deal with the necromancer in the south. He just says that there is a necromancer who happens to be in the south that you need to stay away from. Oh yeah, look at the time. I got to go to the south. And we're just sitting here going, well, wait a second. What does that mean? Like, what is so important that it takes Gandalf's attention, a wizard's attention, a wandering wizard's attention, away from this party that's going to reclaim their own homeland to deal with something in the south? Like, I found that so interesting. And it just made me remember that moment in the films and love it that much more. So now I really need to read the Silmarillion, because I think that story is in that book. But I don't know for sure because I haven't read it yet. All right. So ultimately, this is all wrapped into the whole legendarium that he'd been working on. All right. So the basic premise is this. Gandalf approaches the Hobbit, Bilbo, and asking him, basically, he's just trying to get him to join this company that hasn't been introduced to him yet. And he's always had this favorable connection with hobbits. We don't really know why. I know the Rings of Power is sort of giving us a reason why, but I don't really jive with that storytelling, so I'm not sure how much of it is real or not. But anyway, he has a connection with hobbits. He comes to Bilbo because of Bilbo's ancestry. And what this does a really good job of also is providing context for why Bilbo, aside from all of the other hobbits, would be willing to go on this adventure. And it all goes way back to Bilbo's, not just his ancestry, but his ancestors. Because ultimately Bilbo is half Took. Tooks are an adventurous branch of hobbits, like a version of hobbits, a family line of hobbits. Belladonna Took is his mom. And then you go all the way back further, and it goes to like the Bull Roarer, which is a really, really old Took, the sort of a great uncle of the Tooks, of Bilbo, I believe it is. And he was like a monster of a hobbit. And he just loved adventuring and getting into danger and stuff. And that's really stuff that, you're introduced initially to hobbits as something they're not interested in adventuring primarily. They like to enjoy home and the comforts of life and enjoy nature and just the lifestyle that they've set up for themselves, which I really appreciate. And I would love to live in a Hobbiton-like community, which arguably is pretty much every farmland community, but they're really sort of corporate controlled nowadays. And so I don't know if it's actually like that or not, but in my mind as a child, that's what it was very much like. All right. So ultimately he's approached the next morning by a bunch of dwarves, 1, 2, 3, 4 at a time. And then ultimately Gandalf, and they tell them like, look, hey, we need a burglar. This wandering wizard, Gandalf, told us that you are a burglar. And Bilbo's like, wait, what? No, I'm not. I'm just a hobbit. What are you talking about? And then the dwarves basically say, look, we're going home. We need to reclaim our homeland and our treasure from a dragon named Smaug, or Smaug, or however you want to pronounce it. I kind of like Smaug, but Smaug. And ultimately, Bilbo's like, no, I'm good. Thanks. It's okay. I'm all right. He's like, I'll see you off in the morning, though. I'll make you some nice breakfast. Wakes up the next morning, sees the note on the counter after Gandalf points it out because he is wildly late for their get-together. And so he goes and joins them all on this adventure. It ends up where Gandalf is saving their ass a lot. And if it's not Gandalf saving their ass, it's a lot of other people saving their ass, which begs the question, why did these dwarves think that they could do this on their own in the first place? Is it because Gandalf was with them for a little while? And why the hell was Gandalf helping them in the first place? I don't feel like that was ever really settled. At least not for me. Like, I want to know specifically why. Because we know that because this leads into the Lord of the Rings, and the Ring of Power, the One Ring, is the ring that Gollum had that Bilbo stole from him. And yeah, he did steal it. He didn't find it. He knew he was looking for it, and he just kept it. Thief. If that's the case, then was Gandalf trying to locate the One Ring? And if that's not the case, then was he just traveling with the dwarves so that he could get close to Mirkwood, then veer south and deal with the necromancer, whom we know is now Sauron, assuming that that's real from the films? It really makes me wonder, and I wonder if that's answered in the Silmarillion as well. I'm hoping. Fingers crossed. All right, so basically, Gandalf saves them from trolls, and then they all get caught up by trolls that as soon as light hits them, they sort of freeze and stuff. But the trolls are hilarious. They're like really interesting creatures that, they're just like stupid big ogres is what I would refer to them as in sort of modern parlance, but trolls nor ogres in modern parlance turn to stones. So, what are you going to do? And this was all way before modern parlance anyway. And then ultimately, once he saves them from trolls, he takes them to Rivendell, in which case Elrond himself tells them that, there's actually some moon script in here that gives you some more information about finding this secret doorway at specific time in the year. And so they're sort of reinvigorated, and they head across the Misty Mountains, and then they're captured by goblins. And then Gandalf saves them from goblins. So if it wasn't for Gandalf, these dwarves would be killed at the very beginning of their journey by the trolls. But Gandalf just, and all of it is super quick. Gandalf reveals the light, which kills the trolls. Then he just throws his sword, because wizards in this world can use a sword apparently, to just insta-kill the Goblin Lord, the Goblin King. And you're just like, wow, that's really fast. Why the hell didn't they do that in the first place? I get the goblins stole their weapons and stuff. But I've also found it interesting that ultimately Thorin Oakenshield was trying to parlay with the Goblin King in some manner. He's like, look, I'm on this mission. We didn't mean to come down here. We just sort of stumbled across. We didn't mean to come in this road. He's like, what are you doing in this land? Where are you going? Rah! And then Gandalf just shows up and one-shots the dude. You're like, all right, well, go Gandalf. You have no moral qualms with murder, apparently. And then, clearly, this one singular moment informs everything else that happens, because as soon as the goblins find out that their king has been killed by Gandalf, they want revenge, and they're going to go hunting these dwarves. Of course, on their way out of the Misty Mountains is when they lose Bilbo, and Bilbo ends up stumbling upon the One Ring, and then Gollum, and having this little riddle game, and then Gollum inadvertently leads Bilbo out of the Misty Mountains, and that's when all the goblins start trying to follow them. They get corralled up trees. The dwarves get corralled up in trees by a bunch of wandering wolves, and that's when the goblins come and light fires. And then the eagles just happen to be passing by, noticing fire and noticing the goblins sort of swarming and stuff, and they come by and rescue everyone. Again, without outside interference, these dwarves would have been toast on day one. Why did they think they could face Smaug? And, spoiler alert for the later in the story, they don't. They don't defeat Smaug at all. They had nothing to do with it other than riling Smaug up. Which again begs the question, how the hell did they expect to live through this? I mean, it's just ridiculous. And so I guess they really had a lot of trust in a burglar. And then, of course, this burglar ultimately, which is really funny. Hey, Epiphania, how you doing? You love the book? You used to watch it a lot on your old channel. Oh, you used to watch me a lot on my old channel. Thanks. Keep grinding. Yeah, well, not really a grind. I'm just having some fun doing my own thing. So ultimately, they the eagles save them and feed them and stuff because they lost all their equipment. And then the next stop is going to be at a rest house at this skin changer named Bjorn. And he's like a werebore, basically. He just changes into a bear at night. And I guess it will, too, because he comes in later and helps save them at the very end of the story as well. And then after Bjorn, they hit Mirkwood. That's when Gandalf pops smoke to the necromancer, supposedly, because he just says he's heading south. He doesn't say where he's going. And then the dwarves get captured by spiders because they do the one thing that they're told not to do, which of course they would do, which is go off of the trail because they're hungry. Okay, so then they get caught by spiders. Bilbo uses the ring to save them from the spiders, and then they get caught by wood elves. Thorin was already caught by wood elves, and so Bilbo, using the ring, saves them from the wood elves, puts them all in these barrels, and then they float down the river without problem until they hit Lake Town. They're welcomed by the inhabitants of Lake Town, as they believe that the dwarves are going to fulfill this long-held prophecy about them destroying Smaug and bringing riches back to the land because it's been desolated since Smaug, hence Smaug the Desolation. Ultimately, they get to the mountain, Lonely Mountain. They find the secret door. Bilbo the Hobbit goes inside, finds a little cup, brings it back to them to prove that the treasure is there. But then the dragon smells the fresh air and smells a funky Hobbit smell that he's not aware of because he's never encountered hobbits before. And I guess they have their own smell. Just like I had a soldier in the U.S. Army. He was Puerto Rican, and he told me that they all, like the monolith of Puerto Ricans apparently, thought that white people smelled like bologna. So maybe Smaug was like, that's not bologna. That smells like pipeweed. What is that smell? So anyway, Bilbo goes back down there and has a conversation with Smaug, and he then leaves, barely escapes with his life as Smaug is like breathing flames at him. And he gets back to the people. There's this bird that is apparently intelligent to understand dwarf/hobbit communications and then relay that same information so that later when Smaug leaves the cave to go like wreak havoc on the lakemen whom he assumes sent these interlopers into his lair, the bird tells this rando dude who is constantly referred to as like mean and like gruff but fair, named Bard. He's some human who's like a longtime descendant of like a king of Dale or something, but Dale is like a land that's been in ruin since Smaug took over. So he ends up knowing how to speak bird, which is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. It's a thrush bird specifically. But then later we learned that like the dwarves could speak raven because ravens can understand bird and speak common words. So what the hell? Everyone can speak everything. So the bird tells him about this little hole that Bilbo discovered in the underbelly plating of Smaug. And so when Smaug is actively destroying Lakeview, or Lake Town, I'm sorry, he pulls his arrow back, it flies straight in and one shot kills the dragon. Now, I'm just going to say, if you are a dragon and you can be one shot, wouldn't you be looking for holes in your plate, in your little armor? Like, wouldn't that be like a daily thing that you search for? Or I don't know, every time you wake up, I guess, if they hibernate. I don't even know if they hibernate. For some reason, it seems like a strange contrivance that one tiny hole can be used to kill one giant dragon. All right, I guess he's a really good shot. So anyway, now that the dragon's dead, they go and claim the mountain. And this is when the elves, who are now pissed about the dwarves escaping them, are coming down to get the dwarves back. Why? I don't know. And then the goblins are still hunting them all. And then the elves meet the humans in Lake Town, and they all go together to reclaim money from the dwarves and the kingdom because they don't know if the dwarves are alive or not. They find out they're alive, and they're like, look, this dragon that you stirred up caused a whole lot of pain and trauma and death. How about you give us a little Skrilla in recompense? And Thorin Oakenshield, being the mensch that he is, says, get the fuck off my porch. Like, what? Really? Really? You can't even help these dudes out after you awoke the dragon and couldn't deal with it and it decimated them? You're not even going to give them a little Skrilla? What the hell's wrong with you, dude? So this whole time, there's no like good or bad. It's just morally ambiguous assholes all around, which is shocking for a children's book. But in any case, we can continue. So ultimately, Bilbo leverages the Arkenstone, the Heart of the Mountain, for getting Bard, the Lake Town people, and the elves some sort of, recompense for their suffering. And it doesn't really matter because as Thorin is sending for his men from, I'm looking, Durin. I'm sorry, not Durin. Oh, I could have swore I wrote it down, but I guess I didn't. Yeah, I didn't. What a pain in the ass. Well, sorry about that. Anyway, he calls for his dwarven kin from like the hills. I can't remember what it's called. Dwalin? I don't know. In any case, that army comes over as well. And that's when all of the bats and goblins, wolves, and wargs attack. And so you have Gandalf that came finally back from whatever he did in the south. And he's kicking it with the elf king and Bard. And he helps them with the battle. Everyone sides with each other, the men, the dwarves, and the elves, because ultimately the enemy of my enemy is my friend, as anyone who ever watched Saturday morning cartoons as a kid will understand. So they all work together to defeat the bad guys. Ultimately, Thorin ends up dying. His two nephews stand over his corpse, or his dying corpse, in order to protect him. At the end, he apologizes for turning against Bilbo after Bilbo gave away the Arkenstone. And all is happily ever after. I loved that they talked so much about the time it took to travel all the way to the Lonely Mountain, knowing that you have to take all the amount of time back. And so they stopped at a bunch of points on the way and rested for a while. And it just took a really, really long time to get all the way back. I think it was like a year and a day or something. A year and a month after he first left. He finally returned back home. And ultimately found all of the hobbits of Hobbiton, assumed he was dead, and they were auctioning off of all of his stuff. So it took him a long time to get all of his stuff back, and he didn't even get it all back. He lost a bunch of silver spoons in the process. Can't help but think of that TV show from the 80s. And ultimately starts writing his memoir, which is this story, purportedly, or a version of this story anyway. So my favorite part is the alluded history and world building and what Gandalf is going to do in the South with the Necromancer. I love that. The story itself, they're just a bunch of idiots that are stumbling over the whole land. Like this is the dumbest group of individuals that you'll ever run across that needed the world itself to save them from themselves. So every one of these dwarves suck. The Hobbit sucks. Everyone is completely incapable of anything except for Gandalf, the Eagles, Bjorn, and that's kind of it, because they save them from every single situation. It's kind of bullshit that everyone looks at any of them, Bilbo or anyone, as effective when they didn't do anything. They just stumbled across everything. It's kind of ridiculous. My least favorite part is the fact that they were so ineffective that they even started on this journey in the first place, knowing they could not do it, and then proving that they couldn't do it until other people did it for them. And then acted like assholes once they did. Made me really hate these dwarves. But I know from this novel, and it had he went back and he changed some lines and stuff, different reprintings, and to make sure that it, was consistent with his larger narrative that he was telling. But I know this novel was not meant originally to be part of the grander scheme of his storytelling, but then when he brought it into the fold, he sort of included it in there. And I like this novel for what it leads into, not for what it is on its own. Because again, this is just a stupid kid's story. And it's just not really even that good of a story, to be quite honest. What's great about this is the world building on the back end of the story. What's happening off screen, as it were. That's the cool stuff. So ultimately, I did enjoy it. I did have a really good time with it. And at the end, I did get a little bit, heart palpitations for Bilbo and everything. So I ended up giving it a rating of 4 out of 5 evil eyes. It's not a perfect novel. It's written for kids, so don't expect it to be stimulating intellectually. But it's a fun kids novel. I like stuff like The Last Unicorn, for fuck's sake. So this isn't that far removed from that. And Bilbo's a likable enough character that you kind of look past all the shenanigans and the foibles and the ridiculous contrived situations and the fact that they're ineffective at everything they try to do throughout the entirety of the novel. And it's just one stumbling into a death moment after another. Like at no point does J.R.R. Tolkien think, J.R.R. Tolkien think, maybe I should just give them a challenge that they can overcome without some sort of outside influence. And the closest they got was Bilbo putting him in wine barrels and apple barrels and throwing them down a river. That was the closest they got. And that almost killed them. So even when Bilbo's trying to help them, he's actively murdering them, except that they just happened to survive the task. It's very, very crazy. Hey, Vikinger, how you doing, man? You have to be honest, ever since you were young, The Hobbit has been your favorite book. No shame in that. I mean, it's a fun novel, especially, at like a kid's reading level. This would be amazing. This would be super exciting. It's just as an adult reflecting back on it, I expect more out of storytelling than what this first book of J.R.R. Tolkien provided. And that's all. So I did enjoy it. I thought it was great. I probably will never reread it again, but I can't wait now to get into The Lord of the Rings because I've never read that either. And I don't know how I haven't read it, but I haven't. And I'm excited to get into it and read it because this gave me a lot of backstory to that because it's literally a prelude to the actual bigger story, which is the point of the whole world that J.R.R. Tolkien put together. So I'm very excited about getting to that. And I only know it from the extended versions of the movies. So I'm looking for changes in the stories and stuff that was left out of the story and, just looking at a completely different view than if I was just a kid reading it for the first time, how I would experience it. I think it'll be interesting. So anyway, let me know what you all thought of The Hobbit. And is it your favorite fantasy novel? Are there other favorite fantasy novels of yours? Let me know because, after this is over, I'm going to want to read some more and more and more. So let me know what you like. As always, thank you so much for tuning in and joining live in chat. If you're joining me in chat, really appreciate you. Like it or not, evil spelled backwards is live. So get out there, be like a hobbit, smoke that pipe weed, and be evil.